It was not easy for Agnes to manage the marketing department of a large company, but she was very proud of herself. She had come a long way to achieve this position and did everything she could to ensure that her department completed the tasks set by management and increased the company's profits. Today, Agnes had been working very hard since the morning, and her head was already reeling from the long hours of work. Suddenly, the door of her office suddenly opened, and Agnes, turning away from the papers, saw Stella, who had long worked under her and over the years had become a true friend. Stella reminded her that it was time to take a break and invited Agnes to join them for tea. Some of the co-workers were already drinking tea in the dining room and exchanging the latest news from their lives. Agnes nodded in greeting to the group, and after making her tea, she sat down a little aside from the main company, listening to the conversations only at the edge of her ear. Designer Natasha, as usual, talked about her son's troubles at school and problems in relations with her husband, and Stella talked about her fiancé, her engagement party, and bragged to her colleagues about her expensive ring. The women cast envious glances, bitterly realizing that their husbands were not the princes they had dreamed of. Agnes, finishing her tea, got up from the chair and went into her office. Her heart began to feel heavy. She was already 32 years old. She would like to have a family, but she had not yet been able to find a worthy candidate for a husband. Waving aside sad thoughts, Agnes again focused on the documents. But not half an hour later, the courier came into her office with important papers. Without taking her eyes off the keyboard, Agnes thanked him and asked him to put the package on the table. "As you wish, but I need your signature," sounded a pleasant male voice nearby, and only then Agnes looked up. An incredibly handsome young man was standing next to her, smiling and holding out the form. Agnes felt a flutter in her chest. Embarrassed, she tried to take the pen out of the organizer, but only awkwardly knocked it over with all its contents on the floor. Agnes rushed to pick up the fallen objects. The courier decided to help her, and when he bent down, they suddenly bumped into each other. Agnes began frantically apologizing. "I'll forgive you," the courier replied, smiling, "if you agree to have a cup of coffee with me after work." Agnes felt her mouth go dry, and her heart beat madly. The man's gaze was too insistent, and Agnes couldn't refuse him. The date went great. The man's name was Danny. He told her that he had been working in a courier agency for several years, but he was unable to get a promotion, although he had all the prerequisites for it. He himself came from far away. His whole childhood had passed in a small town, but he had managed to move to the city. Agnes understood Danny very well, because she too came from a small town to go to university, and since then her life had changed a lot. After their first date, they continued to communicate, and Agnes literally melted into the new relationship. She desired to be close to Danny, to make him pleased, to take care of him, and the man reciprocated her with pleasure. Eventually they began to live together, planning their marriage. Stella tried to warn Agnes because she knew Danny so little, but Agnes was thrilled and didn't see any reason to be worried. Soon, Danny and Agnes were married. The newlyweds continued to live in the spacious apartment that Agnes rented, and Danny, thanks to his wife, who gave good references, was able to get a promotion and started earning good money. As time went on, One day in late December, Agnes was rushing to work for an important meeting. It was freezing outside, and she slipped awkwardly on the stairs outside the subway, rolled down the stairs, and banged her head on the stone floor. Agnes spent several months in the hospital, but despite treatment, she felt worse every day. Severe headaches, loss of consciousness, limb numbness. The doctors could not give an exact reason why the trauma she had suffered was worsening her health so rapidly, and after prescribing a bunch of all kinds of pills, they sent her home in a wheelchair. The immobile existence caused Agnes to become depressed. Danny tried to take care of his wife, but it was obvious how hard and unpleasant it was for him. He stayed home less often, saying it was because of his heavy workload, and Agnes, though she felt that her husband was not telling the truth, would not dare to discuss their problems in the relationship. She would have continued to justify her husband's indifference and coldness with fatigue, but one day he brought an unknown woman to their home. "Agnes, this is my colleague, Rita. We need to make a schedule for the near future and discuss the report for the month," Danny said with a strange smile. "You go to bed. I'll help you get settled." Agnes woke up in the middle of the night because of loud moans coming from behind the wall. She immediately realized what her husband was doing with his alleged colleague and felt sick to her stomach. Agnes called out loudly to Danny. There was an immediate silence behind the wall, and a few minutes later he burst into her bedroom with an indignant look. "What are you doing in there?" asked Agnes, but she didn't have time to finish as her husband ran up to her and roughly covered her mouth with his hand. "Are you trying to ruin everything?" he hissed to the stunned-looking Agnes. "I'm just having fun. I'm a man, and I have my needs. I figured no need for me to go to hotels since I have a home," he added nonchalantly. Agnes was overwhelmed by a wave of rage and resentment. "Have you lost your conscience? You think because I'm paralyzed you can do whatever you want? You're nothing without me." "You're wrong. You're the one who's dependent on me now, so stay quiet. And if you keep throwing tantrums, you'll end up on the street. Understand?" The man's voice was so calm that Agnes shuddered with horror and nodded fearfully. Satisfied with the impression he had made, Danny grinned and went back into the next room, where he continued to have fun with his girlfriend until the morning, while Agnes was lying there, clenched in her teeth, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. This went on for several weeks until one morning Agnes woke up thinking that she could no longer endure such humiliation. When she realized that Danny was not home, she tearfully called Stella, who listened to the whole story, immediately took Agnes out of the nightmare and moved her into one of the rooms in her apartment. But time passed, and one day Stella came to Agnes's room to have a serious talk. It was uncomfortable for her. The words were not coming easily, but she had no other way out. "Agnes, please forgive me, but we need to do something about your place of residence." "No, I really want to help, but I'm pregnant. Do you understand? And it's getting harder every day to take care of you. My husband and I discussed and decided to rent you a place to live and hire a nurse." Agnes understood. her friend had a right to her own life and didn't have to waste her energy on her. You don't have to, Stella. I'm delighted for you, really, but you can take better care of yourself and your baby, and I'll take care of my own problems. Agnes smiled sadly. Agnes wheeled around the city in her wheelchair, sinking into bitter thoughts. I can't go back to Danny. I can't get to my mother in this condition, it's too far away. And I don't want to go to the hospital, gasped the woman. Do I even need such an existence? I used to be a successful woman, and now I wander the streets looking for a place to stay. The reflection took her far away from reality. She drew pictures of how she could get rid of her worthless life, and didn't notice how she rolled to the edge of the roadway. Agnes only had time to notice the bright lights of headlights, the loud hum of cars, and felt someone's strong hands forcefully throw her to the sidewalk. Agnes opened her eyes and saw an elderly man in front of her. Are you out of your mind? He started scolding her for being careless. Yeah, I guess so, said Agnes indifferently, and burst into bitter tears. Mr. Webb, that was the man's name, rushed to comfort her. He worked as a clerk in a store not far from here, and on his way home he saw this woman in a wheelchair with a doomed gaze. He thought she was going to commit something terrible and rushed to rescue her. Agnes looked at this sympathetic elderly man, suddenly realized that she was glad she was still alive, and she felt ashamed of her weak thoughts. Mr. Webb looked at the woman in a fatherly way and asked what had happened to her, and Agnes told the whole story of her illness, adding in the end that she was now all alone and had nowhere to go. When the elderly man heard this, he thought for a moment. In the past, Mr. Webb had been a practicing chiropractic, but once he had been unable to help one patient and had lost faith in himself, became disillusioned and left the profession. Agnes listened to the elderly man's story and saw that the memories were not easy for him, but the fire of hope was already burning inside her. Take me as a patient. Believe me, I'm not afraid of anything, she said fervently. Half an hour ago I was glad to die, but now I want to try to make things right. Please help me. Mr. Webb looked intently at Agnes. You know, you remind me of my daughter. She and my wife died 15 years ago, he added, and a deep sorrow reverberated on his face. I will help you, and until I recover you, you will stay with me. Mr. Webb turned out to be a professional in his field, and though with difficulty, he managed to get Agnes back on her feet. After this, she returned to the company, was reinstated, and everyone welcomed her with great joy. As a sign of gratitude, Agnes helped Mr. Webb to return to his profession, actively promoting the courses he created, as many people needed the invaluable knowledge of an experienced chiropractor. Agnes and Mr. Webb developed a warm, almost family-like father-daughter relationship. She divorced Danny quickly, and he did not object, for he had no real feelings for her, and married her only because of her position and money. One evening, Mr. Webb invited Agnes as a guest to dinner with his students. One of them kept his eyes on Agnes the entire evening. The girl thought he looked vaguely familiar, but she could not remember where she had seen him before. The student's name was Larry. He and Agnes got to talking, then after, there were several more meetings in cafes, and, gradually, a romantic relationship developed between them. And soon Agnes realized why Larry's face seemed familiar to her. We met a few years ago in a cafe. Larry admitted cheerfully one day. "You were so pretty. I left you my number, but you never called. Tell me why." And Agnes remembered. She had dropped her phone in a puddle, and the data could not be recovered. Hearing that, Larry sighed with relief, for he thought then that he hadn't made an impression on Agnes. "Yeah, if I hadn't dropped the phone then, maybe life would have turned out differently." Agnes sighed. Unpleasant memories came to mind, but Agnes chased them away. "But we can't escape fate. I felt that you are my one and only," playfully smiled the woman. "I know it for sure, and I'll prove it to you," ardently exclaimed Larry. The lovers were happy and serene because all the bad things were in the past, and there was a bright future ahead of them.